Good afternoon and welcome to the Debut Spotlight. My name is Ellen Comisar and I'm delighted to be here today to introduce you to a glorious debut author, Beena Kamlani, who's out with a new book, a first book, The English Problem, which is just beautiful. And I'm delighted to have her here today. Before we get started, let me just do a little bit of my Mighty Blaze housekeeping. For those of you who are already part of Blaze Nation, welcome back. For those of you who are new to the Blaze, thank you for being here. We are an organization of about 30 volunteer creative professionals who came together at the beginning of COVID and to support the need of authors to continue to reach their readers and readers to find out about new authors. And this happened because book tours were being canceled. Book tours, thankfully, are back in action, but we still are here and we have no intention of going anywhere because this has been a great medium for connecting readers and writers. So if you like what you see today, please go online to amightyblaze.com, sign up for our newsletter, and it'll come every couple weeks and it'll keep you apprised of the entire schedule of authors. And we have all sorts of things from Friday Frontliners to The Thoughtful Bro, to Crime Time, Debut Spotlight, literary fiction, you name it, we have it. And so sign up for our newsletter. You can also find us all over social media. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, which I refuse to call X. We are on Instagram, and now we're on TikTok as well. So tell all your literary friends to join us. So let me get right to Beena Kamlani and her lovely book. I'm going to share a few great reviews, which intrigued me, and then the book has just, it's so engaging. Kirkus Reviews wrote, Kamlani's ambitious debut packs an important dose of relevant history into a very human story. The award-winning author Joseph O'Neill, who wrote Netherlands, said, what a grand, sweeping, mesmerizing book this is, a richly detailed, politically profound story of love, of migration, of individuals caught up in the great convulsions of history. Wow. Publishers Weekly also raved, calling it a dynamic character portrait, as well as a nuanced depiction of India's struggles under British rules. It's a triumph. And Andrew Solomon, who won the National Book Award and is a best-selling author of Far From the Tree and The Noonday Demon, went on and on with his praise, calling the book, saying that it's an elegant and evocative prose. Beena Kamlani evokes both the British understanding of India and the Indian understanding of Britain. Unpretentious, understated, fully authentic. This is a sweeping novel of dispossession, loss, dignity, and love. It contains darkness, loneliness, even tragedy, but also an almost Gandhian narrative of peaceable, unrelenting hope. So please join me in welcoming Beena to the show. Welcome.
Ellen, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
Well, there's still more, so sit back and relax, because I have to share a little bit about your fascinating bio, and then we'll dive right into discussing the English problem. Beena Kamlani is a Pushcart Prize-winning fiction writer whose work has appeared in the Virginia Quarterly Review, Plowshares, Identity Lessons, Learning to be an American, Growing Up Ethnic in America, The Lifted Brow, World Literature Today, among other publications. She's received the Yeovil Fiction Award for a novel in progress. She's been awarded many literary fellowships, including Yaddo and MacDowell. She has been for many years a senior editor at Viking Penguin, and she worked closely with many great authors whose names you know, most notably Saul Bellow, but also such best-selling writers like Terry McMillan, Jacqueline Mitchard, biographers, translations of works by Zhang Rong, Mo Yan, and Renato Arenas. She's taught book editing at New York University for nearly 2 decades and has earned, of course, an award for teaching excellence. Obviously, a very accomplished woman with her first novel, The English Problem. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Can I say my thanks now?
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me, Ellen, and it's a delight to be here. Thank you. delight to be among your audience and the people who are watching the show, and all of you, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. So this book is really a wonderful story about a young man, Shiv, who goes to London. Can you just describe why he's in London, what brings him to London, and what sort of the time period we're looking at?
So in the 20s, let me go back just a little bit. So in 1602, the Brits arrived from England, and they set up the East India Company. That's what it was known as, the Charter of the East India Company. India at that point was a very thriving place. I mean, it was like Venice. A lot of trade went on there. There was laissez-faire. People from all over the world were there trading, and the British wanted to be there as well. So they set up this East India Company to trade. The French were also there. The Belgians were there. The Dutch were there. Everyone was there trading away. And then in 1757, the French garrison in Pondicherry attacked the British garrison in Madras. And that was the beginning, because the two powers were fighting each other now, and both wanted India. They saw what India had, everything in terms of resources, indigo, fabrics, just name it. They had everything. And they wanted a part of it. Everyone wanted a part of it. So that's how it began. As the British in India at that point started fighting for more of India and winning allies, their role went from being one of the many trading there to becoming administrators, to becoming government officials, to then becoming rulers, and the hierarchy began. Ruler and subjugated. That's how colonialism began in India, in a very, very tiny nutshell, okay, for the purposes of this story. So let's go to 1900, 1910. Things were very, very tense in India at that point. The First World War was looming. The Indians promised soldiers to the British in exchange for their own sovereignty, which they were promised. So 1.4 million soldiers served in World War I. 1.4, not a very well-known fact.
No.
And in World War II, it was 2.5 million. So, but of course, they kept rescinding their promises. And so, India's independence was delayed. In 1914, a young man called Mahatma Gandhi, who was a lawyer and barrister in South Africa, in Johannesburg, living there with Mr. and Mrs. Polak, he was a Jewish lawyer, and his wife, Millie Polak, a Scottish Presbyterian woman. In 1914, Gandhi said, "Can you look after things here? I need to go to India. I really need to get there." And he came to India, and the fight to reclaim India from the British began. So that's just a bit of background.
Yes.
By the time we get to my era in the story, which is the 20s, very few people had actually been allowed to go to England for their education. Gandhi's feeling was, he was a trained barrister himself. He trained at the Inns of Court, which is where Shiv goes. And I think his feeling was, we're going to do this quietly and with strength. And what did strength mean to Gandhi? Strength meant knowing the rules that they play by, knowing the playbook, knowing the rule of law so expertly that you could fight it, And so a few people were sent to England to qualify and become barristers, go to Oxford and train at whatever they were doing, political economy or history or economics or whatever, and come back and then join the front lines as the future leaders of an independent India.
So we have this wonderful scene in which Shiv, as a young boy, is home, and his father welcomes Mahatma Gandhi to his home. And in this scene, Gandhi has been, I think, staying there or visiting, and Shiv is sent to retrieve Gandhi's shawl because Gandhi's about to leave. And can you just tell us what happens in that scene, and then sort of we can talk about the meaning both from a literal and figurative standpoint.
So Gandhi's shawl was very important to him. This was an important piece of clothing. Just think of how little he wore. You know, he was as they called him, this half-naked fakir, you know. When in England, he was asked, Mr. Gandhi, why are you dressing with so little, where are your clothes? Why do you have so little on you? He said, the king is wearing enough for both of us, which was funny.
Wonderful.
He was quite funny, Gandhi, actually. He had a great sense of humor. In that scene, what I wanted to show was how childlike Gandhi could be in a way, and also how he was on the lookout for young people, young men especially, who could be the future of India. And so when this young boy watches him for 3 days, meeting all sorts of people, and the power he has, the way he brings different people together in that room, he wants to be like Gandhi. And so on the last day, Gandhi forgets his shawl, and his mother says to him, run on upstairs, go, bring it for him. And so Shiv runs up the stairs, looks at the shawl, and somehow there's a dark, big black blot on it. And he thinks, no, I can't have Gandhi go out there with this soiled piece of clothing. So he goes to his father's closet, pulls out one of his father's shawls, the best one he can find, and he runs down and gives it to Gandhi. And one of the aides rushes forth and says, oh, no, but that's not his shawl. And his mother is looking contritely at Shiv, thinking, you can't even do this one thing right. And the aide goes up and brings down the shawl. And Gandhi looks at it and realizes that it has this big ink stain on it. And he says to Shiv, you are a very thoughtful boy. Come and sit next to me. Tell me who you are. And so Shiv and he have this conversation. And they both completely enchant each other, because Gandhi asks him, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he says, I want to be like you. I want to be you. And Gandhi says, that's a very difficult thing. I don't think you're going to be able to do it. Do you realize you have to give up desire?
Mm-hmm.
And Shiv,
I have that quote written down here, just FYI.
Oh, you do? Okay. And Shiv says, well, what exactly is desire? And he's thinking, it must be like ice cream, which I can never stop with. I can never have enough of ice cream. And that must be what he means. And he says, I think I could do it. And can you never have it again? And Gandhi says, no, you can never have it again. So that's the scene. The two of them have bonded.
And then what happens, I mean, the part that really, in addition to this meeting of this very charismatic figure who's, engaging with this relatively young man, is that Gandhi gives Shiv the shawl that has the ink stain.
Yes.
And it's sort of a passing of the mantle. I actually looked it up, because a mantle is a shawl too, right?
Yeah.
That it's a figurative and literal passing of the mantle to this young boy who is yet to leave India, who is yet to study, who is yet to take on a role. And it was both, you get a lot into, dressing the part. When Shiv goes to London, he's taken to a very high-end tailor to have a suit made in multiple fittings, and because he has to look just the right part. And as he's acclimating to London, various people that he meets are actively coaching him about sort of fitting in. And to me, that's a big central part of the book, is this idea of, not only when anyone enters a city, let alone a city as large and vibrant as London, but especially when an immigrant comes to a city, how many challenges there are. I mean, here's an educated English-speaking immigrant who nonetheless becomes an outsider suddenly in his young 20s, I suppose. Can you talk about...
No, he's 18.
Oh, he's 18. Okay. So can you talk a little bit about, that theme of both the immigrant experience, which obviously you've written about elsewhere, and what it takes to fit in, and how that might be especially relevant today?
Well, I think there, this outsider-insider thing is particularly evident in cities, because cities have a way of being. If, for example, walking in the city takes a certain agility, a certain knowingness. You cannot just walk into people. You have to skirt them,
New York walk.
Yeah, whether you're carrying a lot or not. Otherwise, you're going to be bumping into people all the time. There's that. There's knowing where the cracks in a pavement are. There's knowing your local deli man. There's so many things that make a place home. Whether you're from Maine or from England or from India or from anywhere, there is that process of adjusting to a city and coming to know it. And then there's a moment at which the door opens and you're in. And it's usually when you have a very close circle of friends who then, bring you in. I remember, going through Central Park in a carriage with a dear friend, and suddenly this city felt mine in a way that London had once been. This city felt mine, and I think that moment when you embrace the city and the city embraces you is so poignant. As I say, it doesn't matter where you're from. You could be from Westchester, but you need that moment of embrace. And I think it happens for Shiv at different points in the novel. And then again, the door closes because he's in a relationship and then the woman he loves leaves him and he's no longer...
Oh, I haven't gotten to that part yet.
Oh, and actually, I shouldn't be giving too much of this story.
Please don't.
Because so many of you have not read it probably.
Well, the book is just out January 28th, 2 days ago. If you're just joining us late, the book is The English Problem. I'm speaking to Beena Kamlani, who has written just a gorgeous first novel, and I hope there will be many more to come. So Shiv gets these lessons, and one of the things the book does very beautifully is it evokes all of these scenes where he's at the tailor's and he's at clubs and he's at the Savoy and he goes to various elite events where the need to know whether to shake the woman's hand, whether to doff his hat, all these things, all these customs that if you grow up in a city, if you grow up with this as sort of normal behavior, you don't think twice about doing it. And he is having to learn all of this as he goes, as well as learn about the law. And I just found it really fascinating because there was this, he so wanted to be part of this. He had this deep desire, what Gandhi said, you have to give up desire. But at the same time, he had all of these desires to fit in and to understand the truth of both himself and this society. And there's this real tension throughout the book that, sort of this desire versus longing, what does he want? What can he have? What can't he have? There's a wonderful line in a scene that we won't talk about where you talk about reason knocked in vain against the doors of desire. And that's so much the tension of, what he knows he's there to do, study the law, learn it, go back home, and then what he ultimately is wanting to do, because he does not go for a short time. He doesn't finish his studies and leave.
No.
He's there for a lengthy period and is very enmeshed in the society as a result.
Well, this, behind this, I mean, I actually drew on the Odyssey quite a bit, which I had did with Robert Fagles. Behind the Odyssey is this strong idea of homecoming, nostos, and of course, Odysseus has a wife and a son back home, and he has to make his way after the fall of Troy to them. So it was 10 years, the battle itself, the war itself, and then 10 years of travel back to why am I blanking out here? Back to his home,
Troy. Helen of Troy.
No, back to, I can't anyway, back
Not
home.
to worry.
It's just, I blanked out. I think his journey back home to his wife and his son, these are the key things. He has to overcome so much on the way, and it takes him 10 years to get back home. But the idea is this nostos, coming back home. And I think with Shiv, there are two things going on, because coming back home is a life of complete, a life lived to a template, a life lived to fulfill the ambitions that other people have for you. Yes. He is his family's joy, his family's dream, and he has to come back and basically be the person his family and his community and his country want him to be. But what happens, it's like a parallel. He is on a voyage of discovery, and he wants to find out more about life. He learns to look at the world afresh, anew.
And his father knows this. His father is a very learned man as well. And before Shiv leaves, he actually talks to him about the Odyssey, and in doing so says very clearly, you might think about it as an adventure story, but it's really a homecoming story. And he's trying to emphasize to his son that he has this strong expectation.
Exactly.
You're going away, but don't forget where you're coming back.
There's that,
which of course becomes a big tension for Shiv as a character. I want to also talk a little bit. London becomes its own character. You can, from the very first page, sense the rain, the mist, the food, the smells. You've obviously spent many years in London. Did you go back when you were writing to grab it all, or was it all stuck in your memory?
Of course, I had to do some research. It was Ithaca that he went back to.
Yes.
Ithaca. Ithaca was his home. Sorry, I don't know why. It just, sometimes things blank out.
Happens to the best of us.
Yes, I mean, I think, look, I began with a very skeletal story. I heard this story from my father, who was very devoted to this much, much older brother of his, who was picked by Gandhi to go to England and become a barrister. Yeah. And I knew that he'd gone there. I knew that he became a barrister. But then nobody seemed to know what happened to him. He qualified. It was said that he became very sick. I know that he was brought back to India. My grandfather arranged for him to be brought back to India on a ship accompanied by a doctor and a nurse. So the ship, which was the one concrete thing I could hold on to in this sort of cloud of unknowing, if you like, the ship became the key thing that to me was the shuttle, as it were, between past and present memory, what happened, what he's going to. It became the repository where everything happened. And so the story took place there. I think what happened is that ship, the Empress of Scotland, became like the slippery eel at the end of my worm, like a little worm at the end of my tweezer that I pulled out.
Mhm.
And suddenly the story began shaping itself around that. But it involved going back to England several times. I went to the Inns of Court. I actually found his signature when he was called to the bar.
Your uncle.
Yeah, my uncle.
Wow.
And I used that to get into that magnificent dining hall to have lunch there, because I showed it was on my phone, and I showed it to them, and they said, of course, come in, and I had lunch there. And I tried to imagine looking around at the grandeur of it, that beautiful, beautiful double beam, the ceiling, the wood, the carving, the gorgeousness of it all. I was sitting there thinking, what must it have felt like to come in here for dinner 100 times, a year? So
The barristers, the students were all required to go to this
we're
dinner all the
required to
time.
go to these
So
dinners.
it didn't seem like such a hardship to me.
No, it didn't. No, it didn't. But it's interesting when something becomes something you have to do, how it can become a hardship. But anyway, so I did have to do a lot of research that was critical to the story. I went to Lancaster Gate. I stood outside the house. I tried to imagine what it must have been like back then, far shoddier than it is now, shabby, down at the heels. It's now very grand. But I tried to imagine what all of that was like. I went to the church next door. I got a real sense of what his life might have been like. And then I started writing. I think what happens is you know a little bit, you have these skeletal facts, but at a certain point, dreaming, intuition, the subconscious take over. And you don't know where you're going, but this is the journey.
Well, there's a wonderful blending of fact and fiction. And having not known this backstory about your uncle, I was trying to sense, were there young men from India who were sent to learn British law and come back? And
he's a prototype in a way. Gandhi himself was one.
Right. So I had no personal background. That did not in any way limit my enjoyment of this book.
Good, because
you learn a
personal
lot.
background is tiny. It was literally 5 facts. He qualified against the odds. He did become a barrister. He was a successful barrister. He fell very sick, and then he was brought back. And then what happened? Nobody. I guess he died.
All of the gorgeous fiction has been woven into that structure of facts, that timeline. We don't see the story chronologically, which is fascinating to me and always, I think, somewhat challenging. I want to just go back for 1 second. You gave our listeners a snippet of the kind of metaphor and simile that comes naturally to you. There's this reference to grabbing the worm with your tweezers. I just want to share a few of these and then talk a little bit about your creative process, your influences, whether it comes from the writers, whether it comes from people you read, but just a little bit of language that was just amazing to me. At one point, Shiv is on the ship and he's quite ill. And he says, he tries to laugh back, but the sound is like a cracking pottery plate. Another point, he curls up on the sofa into a comma. He meets a woman and says her eyes were like lice combs as they teased out his discomfort. The bright orange scarf felt like a glossy python around his neck. I mean, one after the other after the other. Are these things that you actively look for and you say, oh, I need a really good metaphor here? Is this something you've trained yourself to do? Is this something when you're teaching your students at NYU? Is this something that you talk to them about as the exemplars of wonderful writing, and how, as an editor, you need to be encouraging your authors to do that. Let's just dive into all of that.
We spent 2 sessions on metaphors.
Really?
Because I think it's so fantastic when emotion and an image come together in this clap, and you suddenly see it. My goodness, like at one point I went to the Hudson River and I was walking around, and the water was all corrugated, and it felt to me like women wearing those corsets, underneath, and the water was just going over these corsets, and I saw it like that, like a whalebone, like a skeleton that the water was shaping itself around. And I came home, I rushed home, and I wrote down exactly what I saw. I need images to excite me to do the writing. I can't just write about something without seeing it, without not just seeing it, hearing it, sensing it. It has to be sensual for me. And I'm so glad you're picking up on this, because each one was worked over so hard. I really
make it look easy, but we know it's not.
I want to take the reader with me. I want to grab the reader's hand and see what I'm seeing. And I could only do this because, how did Shiv, this character separated by time, by everything. How did he come to me? I heard his voice. Suddenly, out of the blue, I heard his voice. And then I saw him, a dandy in London. And then I smelt him through the perfume that he chose.
Which he chooses. That's an interesting fact. He gets told all these things. You got to wear this suit. You got to, dress like this. Your shoes have to be not too polished. All these different details. You need to speak this way. You can't say this. You have to. And yet, in the end, he says, but I'm keeping my scent. I'm going to wear my...
That's what I want. Yes.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous... yet, so the essence of him. But you also see, and I think readers often appreciate that sensuality in the language. And what most readers who are not writers or wannabe writers don't necessarily understand is that those of us who are naturally inclined toward literature and writing, that's how our brains work. You see something, you see a dead animal on the side of the street, and you compare it to something and you write it down. And that comparison is not a forced comparison that how could I describe that animal? It's just like this innate weird ability. Some people can calculate numbers in their heads. Writers can look at something and it reminds them of something else, and bingo bango. But you still have to then polish it and make it and find where does that get used.
You do. And this is where the life of an editor and the life of an author come together,
which we want to talk about. For those of you who missed the beginning, we're talking to Beena Kamlani, author of the gorgeous new novel, The English Problem. And this is her first novel, but for many, many years, Beena was a senior editor at Penguin, and she's also taught book editing at NYU. And so one of the interesting things as a writer that I'm curious about, and we hope our readers are, is how do you make the transition from editor to writer? What are the special complications? Mm-hmm. And the other part of it that I'd love to hear about is a little bit, how did you experience publishing from the other side, having been an editor and, navigated authors to the bookshelf? How did you feel on the other side when you were being the author, being shepherded along, so to speak?
I prayed. I prayed that I would find an editor who would actually edit me. It was not a prayer in vain, because it was answered. But I really wanted to be edited. And people keep asking me this question: do you know what it's like to get into the DNA of a novel? So I once edited a book that had people from 3 different generations speaking. And the lingo had changed over the years. You know, the civil rights era, which brought a new language. Then there was, it just went from 3 generations, and it was set in the South. And I helped write a scene that was written in the dialect and in the intonation of the 3rd generation person. And the author got back to me and said, wow, how did you do that? So what happened was that I went deep into the cell layer of this book, and I heard it, so clearly that it struck me as wrong when I came across it. And I thought, no, she wouldn't speak like this. She wouldn't speak like this. And so I attempted something that I thought might be what she might say, and the author really approved. But I've never, lived in the South. I don't know the South, but I was able to somehow evoke her speech pattern. That's what I'm talking about when I say get into the actual cell level, so that you can help the author do what needs to be done at that particular point in the book. And if you find that, all you writers out there, if you find that, please don't make it an ego thing. Accept that if you find it and it's genuine and it's authentic and it's not about 2 egos clashing with each other, then honor it.
We always say you have to kill your babies, and you have to be willing to let your the sentences that you've struggled and think are so nicely smooth and polished and fit perfectly, for somebody else to say, actually,
let them go.
Let it go, or save it for your next book. It doesn't work here.
Or conversely, a writer will cut something out that I loved, and I'll go back and I'll say, wait a minute, what happened to that bit there? I loved it. Why is it not there? And then the author and you will have a discussion about it, and
Wonderful.
You put it back. So I think this is all a question of really, it's a dialogue, but it's at such a deep level that the author understands what you're trying to do, and you understand what the author's trying to do. And then you're both doing something that fulfills that. Yeah, it's not about you or them. It's about what the book is trying to do, And I think if you find I prayed for an author like that, for an editor like that, and I was lucky. I was very lucky to get the right editor for my book. And there were so many scenes, and of course, things that to me were perfectly, I mean, you would know this, wouldn't you? Wouldn't everyone know this? No, not everyone would know this. So then the challenge became, how do you convert what an editor's told you into something that doesn't sound like a lecture,
Correct.
That is
the weaving of the fact into the fiction story in a natural way.
Background information you need to follow the plot. And again, here I have to say, only put in what's necessary to follow the story. You don't have to launch into a big explanation of everything. No, but then it should also be very organically woven in, so that the reader reading it doesn't think that they're being lectured. They're being given a history lesson. That was not what I wanted to do. So the challenge became, how do you convey this? How do you give the reader the tools they need to follow this story without becoming didactic? And,
Was it, now, as somebody who's been an editor for many years, clearly you could see it in somebody else's work. Did those lessons translate easily when you then sat down to write? Or did you find I mean, most people say, I need an editor.
Do you know how many awful pages I've written and how much I've had to crumple into a ball and throw away because I write longhand? I mean, I kept thinking, you'll never have a novel if you keep doing this. You just keep throwing everything away, and this is not going to serve your purpose. So in the end, I thought, just let it out. Let it come out however it is, and you will then edit it very carefully. And of course, you find things, you find repetitions, you find incoherence. You think, wait, how did we get from that point to this? I need to explain this. You
also did some, I mean, I loved, for example, and we're going to move on after this, but I love, for example, in the early scenes, there's some repetition of words, which are very, it builds. You talk about whistling and chattering, and the scene is, as it is evolving, there's more chattering and there's shivering, and it's visceral because of that. So there are times when the repetitions are working very well for you, and obvious and intentionally, and other times when it's like, oops, I forgot I already wrote that. I want to talk about a couple of famous people that you've had encounters with, and then I know we have some questions, so we'll get to those. And because believe it or not, we're already 2/3 through, which is hard to know.
I can't believe it.
We just keep talking. So you edited Saul Bellow. So I want to talk a little bit about how that experience was, what maybe you learned from his writing that you tried to bring into yours. And then we also talked a little bit in the green room about how you got your agent and not the author who helped you in that.
Yes. So, well, Bellow was the master. I mean, yes. Whatever you've heard is only a glimpse of what the real force was. I've actually sat across the table from him and watched him edit his own work. And it is something to see when the craft, the dedication to language and intuition come together at that point where it's working on the page. It is really something to watch. So I was lucky enough to have seen that, and it definitely informed my own work and how I approach it. Don't be satisfied with, an approximation. Approximations are no good. You have to work for the exact thing. Be precise, the exact thing. Nothing else will do. So that was amazing. Robert Fagles, translator of the Odyssey and the Iliad. I remember one scene when I went back to him and I said, the subjunctive isn't really working very well here. And so he went back to the original Greek and he read it out to me over the phone. And I don't know ancient Greek, but I don't know it. I mean, a few words here and there from school, but not really. But, but then he thought about it and it went from it, and he rephrased it so that we had a much more idiomatic, it wasn't idiomatic. And I was thinking of someone reading it. How would they read it? Because it sounded a little tedious, but he went back and redid it. And so it's just, I think, you want to be of help. That as an editor, So
tell me how Margaret Atwood helped you.
Oh, okay.
And then we're going to get to questions. I promise all those out there. We'll get to them.
So that was a very interesting thing. I'd worked on an introduction she had done for women writers at work, the Paris Review series, which it's a wonderful compilation of women writers at work. And Margaret Atwood had done this introduction and I edited it. And she was very pleased with the editing. So her publicist was Marley Rousseau, who is now my agent, who became an agent and who is now my agent. And she told Marley, you must invite Beena to the launch party. So I went to the party, I met Margaret, and after the party, we walked through Central Park together and we couldn't stop talking. Subsequently, we were in our, early 20s or 30s, I can't remember then. Later on, she became an agent, and many of her authors, I worked with many of her authors. I edited some of these books. And so when it came to finding an agent for this book, I thought of her immediately, and she agreed. And so...
And here we are.
I found her, and here we are. Thank you, Marley.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful to her. So I understand we have some questions from our audience. Why did it take Shiv to get back home, from our regular viewer, Renee?
Well, because
without giving away too much.
That's the thing. He starts a journal, and the journal is a meeting point. You know, it's where the literary figures of the day, philosophers, people like Somerset Maugham, and writers like, philosophers like Bertrand Russell, writers like Somerset Maugham, you know, H.G. Wells, Lawrence Hasman, all these people got involved with the journal. And this was a world he began to appreciate more and more, the literary world.
Right, and part of this is, and it's also very relevant today, is this idea that they started a journal in part because as artists and authors, they wanted to influence and reflect back about what was happening in society, and to give a, which, you know, your book does as well, to sort of...
Realism. They wanted to evoke realism in art, in fiction,
yes,
in philosophy, in, you know, in sculpture. And I think they achieved that. He achieved that to some level through his journal. He also gets involved with literary figures, people in film who were living, they were refugees from Nazi Germany, and they had come to England. I'm not going to talk too much about that.
He has his relationships that are going on. He's establishes himself.
He's established, yeah.
He becomes a Londoner as best he can.
Absolutely. And I think this is how he sees his life now, as being of service to his country through the journal, yes, where people contribute and they discuss things and they want to know more about what's happening on both sides of the fence, you know, mm-hmm, the mill owners, I think the efforts at the time were to reach out to the ordinary, quote unquote, person, the mine worker, the people in lumber yards, in, you know, people who worked for a living. And
they wanted to, you know, in doing so, be promoting this idea of Indian independence and what was the culture about and what was going on.
Exactly. And why literature could no longer afford these platitudes and these romantic imaginings. It had to be much more concrete. It had to get, you know, it had to draw a swathe across society and link people together as opposed to divide them, you know. And I think
we could use some of that these days.
I think that was what really fascinated him, you know, that this is happening. People are coming to this from, I mean, Mulkraj Anand, who wrote Untouchables, you know, I mean, many people wrote for the journal and they brought these ideas to it. So, so I think that, I don't know whether that answers your question.
Yes, very well.
But yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going.
Beena, what is your most favorite item on the lovely bookshelf behind you?
Oh my goodness, how could I ever answer that question?
Lots of books.
Can I put my arms around all of them? There are different moments, you know, there are times when I can only tell you that these are my dearest friends, you know. There is always solace waiting for me. There is always laughter waiting for me. Everything I need is here in these shelves, and I just ask for it. And, you know, I go to them and I pull them off and I sit down in my comfy chair and I read.
What a wonderful question. Thank you.
That is so nice.
Do you have any ideas for your next novel? Perfect question, Anne.
I do. And people who've read the novel are both a little angry with me, and yet so inspired by it, that the ones who have asked me this question, that they've said, can this not continue? Can we not know what happens to these people after independence? And so I think that's where I'm going. I think the next novel is going to be about post-war Britain and what it was like, both for Britain to lose the empire and for India to find its own way. You forget what an interdependent, when you look at this, it's like two sides. No, Gandhi never wanted two sides. He loved the English. What he wanted was for them to leave. Go. You can no longer stay here and impose these terrible rules on us. We need our own sovereignty. We refuse to be taxed on our own salt. The average person earns 4 pennies a day and your tax is 2 pennies. How are they going to survive? They're not. So he wanted that onerous system removed, and he wanted power handed back to the Indian, but he didn't hate them, which is another aspect of the novel.
Yes.
And that is about transforming hate into love, so that you no longer want to hurt the people you think you hate.
Which we need more of that as well. That's a beautiful answer. So will we see Shiv and others that we see in this first novel appear again, or do you think you'll have a new cast of characters?
Yes, and there will be different characters.
Of course.
But because I want it to be a standalone novel, so that you don't have to read the first one to read this. This is not a trilogy or anything like that. I'd like it to be a standalone, but I think it would help if you'd read the first one. Definitely.
Well, I will say you have to read this book, whether Beena says so or not. This is The English Problem by Beena Kamlani. Chuck, do we have any other questions? Maybe not. Okay, so I'll end on that note then. This has been a wonderful conversation. Beena, you tapped on many of the things that are on my note cards. I have many more ideas and thoughts that we could have talked to, and maybe we'll talk later. But this is a wonderful book. As you can tell, it's filled with history. It's filled with real life characters. It's filled with beautiful relationships. It talks about the immigration issue, what it feels like to be an immigrant, how people want to fit in, desire, longing. This book has everything. I am delighted that I ran across it, and very, very happy that Beena agreed to come on my show. So go out. This book came out on Tuesday. You can find it wherever you find books. We like you to go to bookshop.org because they support independent booksellers, as well as a little bit for the Mighty Blaze. You can also go to libro.fm if you like audiobooks. And please buy this book. I promise you will not be disappointed. You will learn a lot, and you will just love the luscious language and everything that comes with it. So thank you so much, Beena.
Ellen and Chuck and all of you, I've watched your lovely questions cross my screen, but I've been so focused on Ellen and what she's asking me that I haven't had a chance to reply. But I thank you so much for listening to me, for having me here. I've so enjoyed this, Ellen and Chuck. And, please, Ellen, reach out with anything else.
I will. So you can find more about Beena at her website, beenakamlani.com. You can find more about us at our website, www.amightyblaze.com. Make sure you sign up for our newsletter and follow us on all of the social media that you prefer. I will be back on Thursday, February 13th at 2:00 with Charles B. Fancher, who has written a wonderful book called Red Clay. We selected it in honor of Black History Month. It is an astounding multi-generational saga that chronicles the interwoven lives of enslaved Black families and their white owners as the Civil War ends and Reconstruction begins. And like Beena's novel, You will learn a lot. You will meet people that will be memorable, and you will see real life struggles and how they work out. So I hope you will join me then. Till then, keep reading. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you from me as well. Bye-bye.